I'm here with Doug Kaczmarek, Moore's Chief Data Officer, talking about the future of data. And as they say on the airlines, if you were heading to another destination, now's the time to say something. But Doug, take it away.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'd love to talk about my favorite topic, data. And so I want to just kind of kick it off and give you a little bit of my background. And kind of my history with data and my pedigree. I started as a statistician analyst back in the day. So intimately have worked with data and built predictive models and done analysis my entire career. Back in the day, we were called statisticians. The term data science wasn't really out there, let alone people talking about AI. It's been a progression, but like a lot of the problems that we use data to solve, especially in the marketing space, have remained constant throughout this time. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that and hopefully break down and kind of go through and demystify what it is when we talk about data. So we've made this transition from, statistician to data science to artificial intelligence. And what does that really mean? So it's all meaningless without data. Forget about the terms for a second. If you don't have data and the data at the heart of everything you're doing in your predictive modeling or your analytics, you're not going to get anywhere. So what are those problems that we've been solving in the marketing space? We've been building predictive models for decades to predict the likelihood to respond to a marketing offer. If you do respond, how much money are you going to spend? Or even in more sophisticated ways, building things around like your future value at time of acquisition. Or if you're an existing donor in our space in the nonprofit industry, what's the likelihood that we can upgrade you to mid-level or to become a major donor, those types of things. So it all uses data. It's all meaningless without data. And I often wonder when we talk about the term data, what people have in their heads. And there's many different ways to talk about it. And you quickly get into conversations about third-party data versus first-party data or second-party data. I like to think about it in the following ways. I like to just break it down based upon different categories of data. So you can see here, I'll go through all these and kind of what I think about them and where they're heading in the future. But you have survey data in the upper left, which is all about what you're going to say about yourself, or in many cases, what you fabricate about yourself, because you're just answering questions on the fly that could be either true or false. Certainly, there's a lot of conversation about creditworthiness and wealth indicators, in particular in the nonprofit industry, as we are trying to identify likely mid-level and major donors. And I'll talk a bit about that. Clearly, search activity, what you're doing within different search engines spins off tons and tons of data that says a lot about you. Everyone has a mobile phone these days, and where you're going and that geolocation data associated with the phone, there's tons of data being collected there. The lifestyle and interests and demographics and that compiled data, it's all about who you are. And then most interestingly is where you spend your money, what are you buying, where you put your money, where your mouth is, like what kind of merchandise are you buying, what types of services do you use in our space, where are you donating money, all that consumer spend. And then, of course, what you do online, most of it behind walled gardens and on social platforms, your likes, your dislikes, who you're following, and what your social profile tells about you. So being in the more futuristic kind of sense and kind of going through these, it's very easy these days to obtain survey data. Obviously, in the last 20 years, the tools online make it very easy for people to survey their employees, survey consumers, and gather lots and lots of data. But as the ease has increased and kind of made it available to all, that data has become less and less reliable, but it still definitely has its place. In reference to the creditworthiness piece, I often have these conversations with folks as we're talking about predicting mid-level and major donors. All of that data is actually predictive models. They're model scores. Part of my work history was actually working for Experian and being a part of the team that was building the predictive models that was estimating income and net worth and things like that. And so just ask yourself the question, have you ever received an email or a phone call where someone asked you how much money you have in the bank and what your open to buy kind of rates are? Of course you haven't. All that data is inferred, but too many of us in the nonprofit industry act as if that data that's available from different providers is the honest truth, when in fact it's just estimated from other data elements on you as a consumer. So the lifestyle and the interest and the demographics, it's very useful. It's very useful at describing an audience and a group of people and what they look like in terms of all of those types of measures. But the data quality is definitely getting worse as privacy laws have made the acquisition of that data much more challenged. And also just the way that the data providers and the compilers themselves do business. They're in the business of selling data in volume. So the example I always love to give is if you filled out a warranty card that you bought a treadmill 20 years ago, it's quite likely that they still have that information on you and are still trying to sell it. So that recency of that data is not really brought to bear. And that means that the quality just gets worse and worse. Search activity, it's over monetized, it's under pressure. It's a very interesting space these days. A lot of people are now going and using AI tools like ChatGPT to answer questions. If you just try to get a straight answer to a non-factual question, it becomes more and more difficult because of all of the ad pressure us marketers are putting in that space. And of course, it's really pretty much just controlled by a few players. The one area that I love to spend the most time talking about is that first party spend data. So understanding where people are actually spending their money. And that's what cooperative databases are all about. It's what our cooperative database Semio audience is all about, and all of our competitors in terms of the collection of that data. And I would call that information second party data as it relates to information we can put on consumers on top of a donor file. And really, that's where most of the kind of critical data elements come into play when we build our predictive models. It's those data elements, understanding what you've done in the past, where you've donated in the past, will predict and indicate what you're going to do in the future. But when you're on those social platforms, they have tons and tons of data on you as an individual, obviously, and they're not giving up that data anytime soon to any outside providers. Any organization out there that's not one of the actual social sites themselves that indicates that they have this data is not really being truthful. This data is all within walled gardens, and they maximize the use of it, as I'll talk about a bit later, to their benefit in the ad tech space. And then the last one here, geolocation data. As I mentioned, everyone has a mobile phone, and there are just dozens and dozens of geolocation data companies that are collecting information on you with what I would call like an incomplete national footprint. They all have different arrangements with different apps on your phone and different ways of collecting data. And so to get a truly great national geolocation database is really, really difficult. It takes a number of different partners to make that happen. But it's also becoming, as I say here, under more and more scrutiny, which kind of transitions me into the next phase of the presentation here. But I hope this gives a great sense for, when we're talking about data on consumers and individuals, these are all the types of data elements that we try to collect, and in some cases we can't, as I mentioned. But the data sets are super rich these days. It's relatively easy to get a decent data set, but you have to always be working very hard to make sure that consumer data is being refreshed and refreshed continually as it gets updated, because that fresh data is what's most important at making good predictions. So when I say that we literally have tens of thousands of data elements on each individual in our data set, it's absolutely true. That's the level of detail that we have, just that's being driven out of these high level categories. So that geolocation data, I was just, pulling some headlines. State of Massachusetts over the summer was indicating that they are looking at the use of cell phone data on residents within their state and whether or not they're going to ban the usage in certain ways. Just one example of kind of like regulators looking at ways consumer data companies are using data and starting to restrict it, which is good in many ways, but can also be fraught with peril. And so my whole view on consumer privacy, I just wanted to show and share this resource. So it's not going to happen at the federal level. I know that there's been a lot of conversation around it, and it's kind of scary if it gets done at the federal level. But what's been happening, as we all know, over the last decade, is that the states have picked up the charge here. They've been leading the way, and they've been creating their own laws, which are really open for interpretation in many different ways, and makes it very difficult. It means that the days of, two guys in a garage creating a data company and doing business on a national scale is becoming much more difficult because you can easily run afoul of state level laws. So you have to have a lot of framework and legal resources internally to do just that. And so within our data environment, we are all over it. We're monitoring this, and we've instituted processes on top of our production data such that when new state laws are enacted, we are able to do the things like remove the sensitive data associated with an individual if it's not allowed. And so what this means is it's just much more challenged. You have to have that framework and that environment and all of the opt-out policies in place, or else you could get in big trouble. It also means that first and second party data, that spend data that I talked about on my consumer slide, is even more important. So I've heard a lot of different folks across the industry talk about getting more data on your donors as a very important strategy to understand who they are and to help your ecosystem and help predict what they're going to do next. And that is certainly true. It's both their transactional donation history and any other information that you can derive from them, whether it be from surveys or other feedback loops, just becomes more and more important as we go forward. It also means that all that digital data that we're collecting on individuals just becomes way more complex overall. So a lot of difficulties, but it's going to continue, in my opinion, to happen at the state level. I'm coming to you from the state of Colorado today. Colorado has their own Privacy Act that they've put into place. And there's been a lot of confusion across the industry with that situation because they have not exempted nonprofits like a lot of the other states have. But it's our opinion that they are looking to remove sensitive data, which we have from all of our systems, but they're not saying that we can't keep the individuals within the database or within our cooperative databases. And so we continue to do that. We just don't have any of that sensitive data that's been indicated in the legislation available on those individuals. So we make sure on the front end, as we receive data from our data partners, that there's no sensitive data available in the states that are restricting it. And we have different checks in place that are run routinely to make sure that that stays the same. So digital data. So this is like a super challenge. I feel like, there's a news story here. This group, this headline pulled from back in June. Feel like it's one of these, kind of trade area kind of stories that gets regurgitated all the time. It's kind of like your local news. When news is slow, they report on what the Powerball jackpot total is at. And it becomes like, hey, let's recycle things. The way that digital media is purchased today and through the various networks that it's purchased, it's like always rife with waste. And so I'm going to get into kind of a whole conversation about marketing from an audience first point of view. And so my whole career has been building predictive models using consumer databases, information down to the consumer level, and understanding who is that person, and are they likely to respond to an offer to donate for the first time. And I have always contended that the way to go about that is to go find them in the channels in which they live. It's not as if a channel spurs somebody to respond. It's their interest in the organization, the appeal, their personal experience with that story from the organization that drives them to make a donation for the first time. And so I just think it's very interesting to think about like the kind of digital ecosystem, if you will. Last week I was in a meeting and we were talking about this topic and also talking about direct mail. And somebody said that direct mail is the most predictable channel. And I've heard that said over and over again. And it's interesting to me because it's like, why isn't all marketing channels much more predictable and measured? And I really think it comes down to the whole ecosystem and really the way and the reason why it was all set up in the first place. So I have this like whole concept of brand advertising versus direct response. I was brought up in the world of direct response, of using databases, using direct mail, and then later on email and other digital channels to specifically go after individuals that we predict are likely to respond. However, the whole like ecosystem of digital advertising is all about brand spend. Their business models are all about that CPM, higher volume. And so when you look at the Winterberry Group and you look at just the tens of millions of dollars that are flowing into the largest of the tech companies and the social platforms, they're in the business of eyeballs and more exposure. They like to, in my opinion, play lip service to the idea of measurement and that predictability through various tools, but often fall like woefully short. So we're working very hard within More and within our data companies here to build out solutions that kind of like get through all of this waste and really understand like we want to target the individuals, but it's very difficult in the ecosystem. We are definitely the outlier. As I have talked to many of these companies that are providers within the space, they don't have big brand advertisers really breathing down their necks around the measurement side. They certainly do to a certain extent, and there have been a lot of very notable exceptions over the years. Some of you may remember about 3 years ago, the chief marketing officer at Procter & Gamble was really pulling into question like this whole issue of how all the media spend was truly being measured. And so I believe that the future of digital advertising needs to really be driven to it's all predictable. It's all highly measured. And so the way for us to do that is to collectively continue to put pressure on all of our providers to get visibility into how that ecosystem works and how we are onboarding consumers into their platforms so that we can understand and experience them and get that true kind of measurement going. So all of that leads up to what I call kind of like the new direct response. So we've been talking about ourselves as a constituent experience marketing company here at More, and more generally, I kind of come up with this quote around what I think the new direct response is with an integrated like audience first omni-channel communication strategy. It's like we know who's likely to take an action. We know who's likely to give that first donation if you solicit them. We understand once you're on the donor file, who's likely to become a sustainer or give a DAF gift. or become a mid-level or major donor. Now, with all of that data and using that machine learning, we can and we should be able to deliver the right and consistent message across all channels, so that we can align creative and messaging and know that we're in those digital channels, we're getting to the same people that we are getting to in the direct mail channel. So we got to push harder and harder our vendors on the digital side to do that true one-to-one and know we're delivering those messages to the right people and there's not waste that's involved with it. So how does all of that kind of manifest itself in terms of day-to-day work? Well, we're building a platform for it. The first thing I want to say is, I'm talking about data and technology, and there's a lot on the screen, but you have to have the human element of the strategists involved. So how do you use the data once you have it? So that happens a lot of different ways, from consultation to agency type of work in terms of understanding organizations and objectives, and then getting into strategy and planning around what those donor journeys would look like and what the creative would look like associated with them, and then down even further into the weeds of managing campaigns and the whole ecosystem. So across the top, the human element of all of this is still vitally important. And so all of the buzz around AI and the machines taking over, so far, not even close to that type of a world at this point. The people need to understand how to use the data. So the data is the lower left here, and it really starts kind of with the client's data. So leveraging the client data, I'll probably bring it up again later, but what I see across the nonprofit industry is data in silos within organizations, CRMs that are separate from digital data, which are separate from email databases or event databases and things like that. We've built the technology to pull together data into one environment that we call our Simio Cloud Connect platform. So it pulls together all of your disparate data from the organizational level, and it marries it together with what we have from our consumer license data, all that demographic, lifestyle, survey, voter data that I mentioned, and also marries it together with our Simio Audience Cooperative Database. So 400 plus organizations donating their donors and their donor transactions into that product. And therefore, we understand a given organization's donors extremely well. We know where they're donating with everyone else, in addition to what they're doing with you. And we layer in all these other types of information on top of them to do a whole host of different things that I'll talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to just take a little tangent into this concept around identity resolution and identity management. It's becoming a much bigger type of conversation and data platform over the last 5 years. And some of you may have different providers who are reaching out to you, trying to sell you solutions along these lines. And what I want to say here is we've built that as kind of a foundation to what we do within our data company. And so when you work with us, you kind of get it inherently. We have this kind of solution to pull together the data. And we leverage a data provider that has information on every individual in the United States and where they've lived over the last 15 years. So over 2 billion records that we can bring to bear from the postal point of view to understand, okay, we see a donation from a given donor 4 years ago. Is that donor still living at that same address, or have they moved to a different address, a different state? And can we resolve that information back into one record so we can keep track of people to make the powerful predictions that we need to do? I said that in about a minute. That's extremely difficult to do. And in terms of the process that we go through to create our own identity graph within More, and we're working hard on making it better all the time. And I wanted to just talk a little bit more about some of the issues and challenges. So as I've mentioned, because of poor data quality and data silos, it's more and more difficult to do. And then you've all heard about how third-party cookies are going away and mobile identifiers becoming opt-in through Apple in particular. And then I mentioned like the walled gardens and no visibility to consumer data there. So being able to stitch together data becomes even impossible in certain situations. And then I've referenced it a few different ways in terms of like the digital media buying kind of ecosystem, but the viewability into what they're doing. What are they actually doing with your data? And what types of records are they associating with your information as you're utilizing them? And that lack of clarity can be super challenging. So all of these things, plus those data privacy laws that I mentioned, make it very difficult to actually complete a process and build a process called ID resolution. And because it's so difficult, there's a lot of providers out there that have built business models around it to do it specifically for organizations and really for the most part, targeting larger brands or other service brands like ours. So my next slide is purely informational, and I'm not going to copy or comment specifically on any one organization, but each row here is a different organization that provides some form of identity solutions. And there's a lot of great tech that's involved with a lot of these different companies. And we work with a few of them, and we've evaluated even more over the last few years for their different services to see if we can improve what we're doing. There's a check marks in every box for everything, just about, except for just a couple of X's here. Everyone claims they have a full suite of functionality on everything. And the one thing I can tell you about that is that may be technically true, but the level of expertise in certain areas varies dramatically from one provider to the next. Most of these have digital data expertise. In fact, that's where the whales are, right? That digital ad spend and the tens of billions of dollars that are being spent every year. When most people talk about identity, and if you go searching and Googling different solutions out there, very few of them actually talk about anything to do with postal identity. They're almost always talking about digital online types of identity. So that kind of connectivity between both of them is very important. And again, their incentive and pricing models are very often volume based. So when you're trying to get highly like specific and you're trying to do that true one-to-one marketing, that audience first marketing, that kind of runs counter to how they want to do business with organizations. So they spend less time thinking about the true direct response type of a marketer as they do thinking about the very large marketers that are doing more of the brand spend. So we have to understand and we have to push that further. And so my suggestion is they are hunting whales for the most part. So picking a provider in this space is very critical, and it varies quite widely. So bringing that
when you're talking about that pre-built connector, can you describe what that pre-built connector looks like for folks in our audience?
Yeah, that's great. So so the pre-built connector in identity usually resolves to each of these companies have a methodology for creating a persistent ID associated with an individual or a digital form of an individual. So they all have methodologies for taking email addresses or hashed email addresses and associating them to an online digital identity in which you can buy programmatic media, or maybe going the opposite direction and taking an email address and identifying what the postal address is. Certainly in our business, it's a lot of what we're trying to do is solve the problem from taking postal addresses, names and addresses, and associating them with their digital identities, whether it might be an email or a mobile ID. So you can think of it as a big cross-reference tables of their persistent IDs to your data, and how do you integrate all of that together? And so if you're taking, for example, old postal addresses, how do you associate it with the current postal address? And then how do you associate that with an online digital ID such that you can serve, a digital ad to them. So it really, at the end of the day, the way we think about it is it's a lot of different cross-reference tables for us to move data from one platform to the next. Hopefully that kind of tracks a little bit.
Thank you.
Sure. I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about the nonprofit data problems, and I've already referenced them, but I can't help myself because this is so important for our industry going forward. So many people within the nonprofit industry talk about the challenges of shrinking donor pools and the inability to find new donors, and all those types of issues. Certainly rising costs across the board make it more challenging to do things in direct mail and to acquire new donors. Where we're not really investing nearly enough is our thoughts and techniques and technology. I mentioned data silos and poor data quality. We see it all the time. We receive data, as I mentioned, into our cooperative database from 400 plus organizations out there. And the quality of data that comes over to us, in some cases is pretty good, but in many cases is not. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. And certainly it's that lack of investment of data folks on the organizational side and the technology to update the databases. We think about all the different ways digitally that we're outreaching to potential donors. But quite often when we get information coming back, it's all just lumped into one channel called digital, and it's not even broken out by email or programmatic or connected TV. And so there's just not enough real emphasis on this type of stuff internally. It's very challenged. And then the other piece of it is it just moves too slow. The data moves too slow to make decisions more quickly. And we know that consumers are moving very quick in their day-to-day life. And if we want to be out in front of them with the right type of offer at the right time, we need to have fresh data. We see a lot of people updating their database monthly, and only updating their data providers monthly, and see some even slower than that. And with current technology and the current technology that we're using within our environment, when we get new transactional files, when we load them to our platform, that data is immediately available to all of our systems and modeling to make decisions and to take action. But we, as like a technology company that's using the latest technology, is often slowed down by providers who can't go faster. So we need, again, investment in making things go faster when they need to go faster, so we can get those messages out to potential donors and to existing donors more quickly. And then I think associated with that, but many of you probably are living this. When I start talking about an audience first solution and go find that audience in the channel where they live, organizations often aren't aligned that way. Organizations are often aligned to, I've got an email channel and I'm using this agency over here. I've got a direct mail channel. It's got a different budget and it's executed in a different way, potentially with a different agency over there. And there's not a lot of concerted effort to pull all that together. So we see a lot of organizations making this change and struggling with this change. And a lot of people nod their head and say, yep, that makes a whole lot of sense. We need to do it. But it's very difficult, right? So we can do all this great work with the data. We can make the data move faster. But if we're not aligned internally within organizations to actually take advantage of it in this way, it's just not going to happen. So I recognize that's a big challenge, and it's something we talk about all the time. So aligning to the data. So here's where I have seen people talking about more futuristic kind of technologies, and it's not even that more futuristic. I hear a lot of conversations about CDPs, and I mentioned Simio Cloud Connect as our constituent data platform And I described it, and I started to describe it in terms of the data, and I'm going to come back to it in a minute. But I just wanted to take a little tangent into the whole area of CDPs. I read through the websites and the marketing materials from a lot of the data providers out there and a lot of the companies and vendors that are producing CDPs. And I've been doing this a long time, and I have a hard time even trying to figure out what it is the heck that they're selling, and more particular for a nonprofit organization, what it even means for you as an organization, and just what would you do with a CDP on the back end. And then even more so, it becomes so much more frustrating because I hear things like, we're building a new CDP, it's going to be online in 18 to 24 months from now. And I'm like, holy cow, it sounds like you were sold something that is vaporware, and now they're talking to you and they're gonna build something for you that they've never built before. And so when I went out and I was looking at the topic, I came across a number of surveys, and you can see the super high level results here. So few marketers are actually satisfied with their CDP when they finally do get it up and running, and next to none of them actually indicate that their so-called CDP solution will handle anything that they've got planned for in the future. So that's why we started talking about, like, how do we build out solutions for nonprofit organizations that is like CDP-like or a CDP light, and it actually has functionality and makes the data move and utilizes that predictive modeling and that consumer data in the right way to have those very specific kind of like experience marketing, initiatives and programs. So that's why we started talking about CXM and our CDP, and it's all about incremental progress. We got to have data moving more quickly. We've built an anonymized environment to take online data and marry it back together with our offline data so that we can do the measurement and understanding of our media buying, as we're taking those audiences online, and we can create those attribution reporting and analytics to understand the investment. Those are all critical parts of it. But we've also built a very flexible environment to make all this happen. But I also wanted to just interject a bit about AI tools, because everybody's talking about AI tools these days. And I wanted to talk about it and break it down in a couple of different ways. So just some quick thoughts. First of all, if you're interested in the topic of AI as it relates to nonprofits, I encourage you to go to fundraising.ai. There is, I heard Nathan Chappelle from Donor Search. He's kind of one of the principals behind this, and he often refers to responsible use of AI within nonprofits. And I think that's a very good way of thinking about it. And they've put out a framework for what responsible AI usage looks like. So I encourage you to go look at it. And then what I also encourage you to do, me on my soapbox here, is to question anyone that just talks to you about generically AI. Talk about, like, what's the application and what is the data? This whole talk about the future of data, the data is the important piece here. And I want you to think about AI in 3 buckets at a very high level. And I'll go right to the third one, because the third one, we've been using machine learning techniques and AI to do audience identification and predictive modeling for a long, long time. Before we actually had the machine learning techniques, we were doing this type of problem solving using traditional statistical techniques like regression modeling and logistic regression modeling. And then eventually we got into neural nets and other advanced techniques that turned into machine learning. So we've been doing this for a long time. And I've heard nonprofit organizations like freaking out about the use of AI, and should they stop all their vendors from using it? The important distinction on number 3 here is the fact that we're using it in data in our closed loop environment, in our closed network environment. So all of that data I talked about that we pull together within our data set and within our co-op, nobody else has access to that data. The machine learning techniques are making predictions on individuals, but no one else can reach into that data and get a hold of any of that data in any way, shape, or form. So just know that this has been out there. And really, like, if you look at all of the different data companies that are doing predictive modeling, everybody is using those techniques today and have been for a while. It's not the technique and the AI machine learning algorithms that is unique to a given company. We all have access to those same algorithms. It's that data. It's how we put that data together that distinguishes one company from the next, and their ability to make good predictions and affect your programs in that way. What has really blown up in the last 12 months is the first two categories here. It's the use of the generative AI and ChatGPT and all of those other types of AI algorithms that is sitting on top of data. What data? Well, in many cases, the data it's sitting on top of is, the open web. It's all the websites that have allowed their websites to be scraped, and they pulled it into one giant data set, and then they've worked hard at adding other types of data to it to do the things that ChatGPT does. And so the first of these, I would say, is just like improving day-to-day business operations. So can you use ChatGPT to write a job description for a given position really quickly? Create the bullet points for that job description. Those are like day-to-day business operations that are not unique to the nonprofit industry. And everyone is like, it's the Wild West. Everyone's doing it out there. Companies are rushing to put in standards around how their employees use those tools and the different tools that are available. And frankly, it's almost impossible to keep up with all those different tool sets. You got to read about it every day, because every day there's a new company popping up with a new twist on it, whether it's text, using video, using audio, combining video and audio together, all different kinds of ways to use that information to build out better business operations. But then more specifically, number two, and I think this is really where, the responsible AI usage is coming into play, is how do we tell our stories and how do we use AI in our creative components and our messaging, and what's the ethics around stories that are told using AI that may be fabricated in some ways, or using images, or potentially using images that we don't own. And as an agency on behalf of organizations that, according to their contract language, own the creative once it's done. But if you're leveraging AI tools that is scraping things off the open web, how much of that data do you actually own on the back end? And so we're working hard within More to put together all the right safeguards there and policies there. It's cool to me because the marrying of 2 and 3 is really where we're going in the long term. So what do I mean by that? When I talk about audience identification, for the 30 years that I've been in the industry, it's all been about using that consumer database to build a predictive model to say, this is the individual I want to target. I believe they're a good acquisition prospect for me. I want to put a piece in the mail, or I want to send them an email, and I want to acquire them. It hasn't been so much about exactly how do I talk to them and how do I message them? What's the tone of voice? What's the image on the page? Or should there be a different video image associated with them in a connected TV offer, for example? Now that we're building out some of these AI tools, we have the ability to create true one-to-one ads for people based upon their data and test those types of things, going beyond an A/B test to 4 versions, 8 versions, or 1 million versions, 1 million versions in the mail, 1 million versions in an email. And then having all the right process in place to do that. And so there's definitely still a ways to go to make that a reality. But that's what our whole CXM foundation is all about. So in the middle, when I talk about audience development, segmentation, and marketing automation, it's all about that, taking the predictive models and associate them back to individuals. Like, okay, now we've decided we're going to promote someone, and now can we build a different predictive model to understand exactly what we should say to them. That's the future. That's where we're going. I hear a lot of people say the commercial space is already there and nonprofits are way behind. That's somewhat true. I don't think that there's a lot of like commercial entities that are actually doing it very well, but some are definitely really pushing the envelope on all of it. And what we're building here are all the ways to do that automation. And that's going to be a highly customized process for all organizations. Everyone has a different way of thinking about this and executing it. And it's not going to be build it all at once. It's going to be incremental solutions to create first trigger-based campaigns that could be deployed more rapidly, in particular through email, or in particular through a connected TV ad. But to do that and to do it well, you got to know, again, going back to that whole vendor, component, how do you take that individual and know that when you're associating that individual to a mobile ID, you're getting that exact person, so that when you're buying that display ad or that connected TV ad, you're putting that exact message in front of the right person. So we've got this very practical CDP environment by which we marry all this data together across all these different sources through all this identity resolution. We assimilate all that data together. We build out, derivative data from that, data variables that flow into our predictive modeling and our machine learning, which is referenced here on the chart by what we call audience solutions. Once we have all those great predictions, we can then conceptualize what the different donor journeys or trigger journeys look like. And then we can start to automate those. And once we've got those automated, we can then push that data to all the channels. So any addressable channel. So now we're in that true direct response area. We're not just blasting out advertisements, within the programmatic media buying. We're actually getting highly targeted, only putting our ads in front of people that we want to across all of those channels. And if we do all that well and we do all that right, we drive more conversions, we drive higher value conversions. And then on the back end, the data feeds back quickly, where we can do all the business intelligence on it. We can measure it, here represented by the attribution and campaign analytics. So we can understand, which channels in concert together are driving response. And then, that true machine learning piece means that the data must feed back in at the beginning of the loop so that we can refine the solution, make it better, refine the predictive model, refine the segmentation, and do it all over again. So that feedback loop quickly, taking that data, whether it's coming in digitally through a digital donation, or if it's coming in through the cage and it's getting caged and processed, pushing that data back into our environments really fast so that we can act on it and complete that loop. And as I said, make it better and better over time. That's true machine learning. That's true AI. That's faster data. That's more effective data. And that's maximizing consumer data kind of throughout the whole dynamic. So it's a lot to digest. There's a lot here. And as I said, the way we engage with clients to do this work is kind of everything I talked about in terms of putting together the data sets, but it's also identifying what are those key kind of points and where's the biggest bang for the buck. And it's not a build it all at once and deliver it 18 months later. It's identify those short-term problems that we can affect in a 6-week time period and get the data flowing and moving, and then enhance it as we go. So that's the CXM platform from More, and that's Semia Cloud Connect, and thinking about like the new direct response with that pressure of understanding who the consumer is that you're targeting in a concerted way across all channels. Thank you so much. That's the end of the scripted part. I left a little bit of time for any questions, comments. Would love to hear some.
Put any questions you have in the Q&A part of Zoom here at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on how you have yours set up. One of the things that you had mentioned, the deprecation of cookies. What what is your view on modeling from Facebook and from Google vis-a-vis donor communications? Is that an effective strategy? They seem to have all of the data in the world, but not donation data. How does that work?
Yeah, they do. They have a super rich data set, probably with like just like ours, tens of thousands of data points on all of your activity across the board. And they do their own predictive modeling. They call it lookalike modeling. And so just kind of connect that to a lot of my comments. So you onboard a donor file, and they will plug your donor file into their walled garden and say, here are the profiles of people who look like they're donors. That's pretty effective. I think it used to be super effective, and many nonprofits have seen like performance kind of degrade over the years, and also be subject to all the pressure of all the whales out there who are buying up that same ad inventory and driving up the cost of all of that information. But it's not necessarily exactly the people who you think you're targeting, or if you're doing other communications through other channels, through connected TV or direct mail, they won't let you take that lookalike audience and take it out of their platform to understand who you're actually targeting, so that you can kind of like deliver that surround sound in other channels. So it almost by nature, because it's a walled garden, becomes like a siloed audience that may intersect with your audiences that you're trying to acquire from other channels, or may not. And so that just makes it more and more difficult. And they're making a lot of money at it, so they're not going to change the way they're doing things. So it certainly has a place, but you got to know that it's different from like a true like targeting of surround sound kind of way.
Another question in the chat: are you presently working with Spanish files?
We do have some. It's definitely more challenged, and I guess there's a couple different ways of thinking about it. We certainly, given the fact that we've got like every adult in the U.S. over the age of 18 in our file, we have a lot of that data in there. It's also, I didn't really talk about this a whole lot on the data privacy laws, but a lot of the sensitive data goes to race, ethnicity. And so it's becoming harder and harder for us to target in those ways, because the data is just not available to us. So yes, it's there, but yes, there's a lot of very unique challenges to make it effective.
Okay, thank you. And then you had mentioned that there's a lot of smoke in the CDP market. What are some things that folks could look for as warning signs that channel your best Jeff Foxworthy? You might be hearing a CDP snake oil pitch if.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's on you as the consumer of the product to dig in and to like ask about the timeline and the specifics of what's going to get done when, and whether or not they've actually built a similar solution for someone and what that looked like. And like get practical into the data and say like, well, why does it take so long? And if they can't give you specific answers around like the building out of the data and the functionality around it really quickly, that means they're just building it on the fly. So it really, having someone on your side who really understands the practical nature of what the data is, and how it's going to move, is very important.
So it's the difference between buying a house and buying the land that someone will quickly throw up a house upon.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, for sure. And it's not like that everything needs to be built, because a lot of organizations have unique like needs that they want to have built into what their CDP solution is. It's just, do they have the framework and the team behind it to build it quickly?
Yeah. Okay, we have a question. I attended a seminar on omni-channel acquisition. Thank you for your loyal viewership and tuning in for more than one more webinar. And they found that channels like CTV seem to reach a more diverse range of viewers. and that nonprofits are exploring new digital channels like sponsoring influencers. Are there new digital channels that you have noticed growing in popularity?
Yeah, well, certainly like the influencer component and the CTV is just growing like crazy. You know, these days, like at first the CTV piece was thought to be like the way for us to get to younger on average donors, because you know, the younger people were cutting the cord more quickly, signing up to all the streaming services. And now it's just becoming more widely, like everybody's there in to some degree in terms of the consumers on some platform. So I just think, and then the ability for us to create video content that goes along with that connected TV and make it very compelling and tell the story in a 30-second spot, it is just fabulous. And then tying that back together to anything you are doing in the offline channel so that it's very consistent, I think is super important. So the influencers for sure, you know, the influencers are all about eyeballs. I think that there's definitely a place for certain organizations to be considering how to use influencers on different social platforms like YouTube and Instagram. That's super important. But also, you know, trying to leverage the current audiences that you have into those environments as well.
Thank you. And it really does highlight that these days there is only one distinction between channels. Is it addressable or is it not addressable? Can you talk to a person or are you talking to an audience? And influencers are good for the audience. CTV is great for the addressable.
Yeah.